Welcome into this week's episode of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, and we are here, as always, to talk all things college basketball as we keep just kind of making our way towards March Madness here. We are just a few days away from March getting underway. That means that a couple of those mid major conferences are wrapping up their regular seasons this week. They will then head into conference tournament play. That's when we'll start locking in bids to the NCAA tournament. So we are right around the corner from being able to definitively say some of the teams that will be dancing through the NCAA tournament. In the meantime, though, there's plenty of movement all over the bracket, but we're going to focus in this first segment on the top seed line. The one seeds, we know who they are as of right now. We've got Duke at number one, Michigan number two, Arizona number three, and UConn occupies that fourth spot. Who can catch them, though? Who is still in the running to make it into the one seed conversation as we reach really the last week and a half of the regular season? Most teams have about 3 games left in their schedule, and then they will play their conference tournaments. All of these teams that we're going to be discussing, of course, from the high major conferences across college basketball. So after we discuss that, we will then, in the second segment, be talking a little bit about awards because we're coming up on that point in the season as well. We will talk about the Coach of the Year candidates, who's in the running for that, who would be my pick to this point in the season, and Player of the Year, National Player of the Year, that is, as well. We will be talking about really the short list of candidates that we have left who could still win that award and the reason why that list is so short at this point. And in the third segment, we will be taking a couple of mailbag questions. We have a wide variety. We've got quite a few to get through as well. So excited to break those down for you. And then, as always, we'll get you out of here with the games of the week, get you prepared for what will be the last full week of the regular season. We will then, of course, not be doing any more games of the week beyond that point next weekend because we won't know the matchups. The game of the week would basically just be telling you to watch whatever tournament action is ongoing across the country. So, as we get into it, without any further introductions, let's talk in this first segment about the one seed line. And it's going to be a little bit of a different conversation than we've had over some of the past seasons that we've done this, that we've kind of broken down which teams could make it to the one seed line as we flipped the calendar from February to March. Sometimes it's a wide range. You've got multiple spots that are still open, multiple teams still in contention. This year, though, we know that the top of the sport has a little bit of separation from the rest of these teams. And so it's going to be interesting to break down where these tiers sit. Right now, as one seed locks, I would have Duke there as the number one overall seed to this point. Now, not a lock to be the number one overall seed when we get to the NCAA tournament. Michigan is still very much in that. Arizona still has enough runway that I think that they are capable, maybe not likely, but capable of making their way back into that number one overall position. It would take a little bit of help, of course, from Duke and from Michigan, whether that's losses in their conference tournaments or a loss down the final stretch of the regular season. Whatever that means, they are still in touch of the number one overall seed. But those three really make up a tier that is locked in for all intents and purposes. Obviously, if a team loses out from this point forward, that would be 4 more losses on the resume for most of these teams. That would obviously ding them and bring them well back into the conversation with the other teams. But with only 3 losses for most of these teams, 2 losses for some on their resume for the entire season, it's hard to believe that they're going to drop that many games in a row to finish out this stretch. So, barring that, if we kind of accept that these teams are going to be what they've been to this point, we've got 3 teams locked into the one seed line: Duke, Michigan, and Arizona. We know that they have separated themselves. They obviously have some of the best records in college basketball. They've also put together resumes that just far exceed what anyone else can bring to the table. Double-digit quad one wins. Obviously, just the lack of losses in general that they have compared to even the teams that are in this next tier. They were talking about they would have to lose out into the conference tournament to even put themselves in the same tier in terms of the total losses that they bring to the table. So those teams are well above any kind of discussion about fading from the one seed line as things stand today. We then move, though, into a little bit more interesting debate because UConn is in that next spot. They are the last one seed as things stand today. I think that they should be the heavy favorite to hold that final one seed spot once Selection Sunday does come around. There's a couple of reasons for that, and I'll break them down here. First of all, when the selection committee gave us their preview, their top 16, UConn sat fifth. That's important because Iowa State has since taken losses. That means that UConn would, in a de facto way, move into that fourth spot because they have won all their games since that point. They've also picked up one of their best wins of the season against St. John's, absolutely blowing out St. John's in what was a critical Big East battle for the regular season title. So now UConn is likely going to be a regular season, at least a co-champion in the regular season. They will go into the conference tournament, and if they can run the table, that would then imply that they pick up one or two, maybe even three more quad one wins to their resume. That should give them enough cushion against the Purdue's, the Iowa States, the Houstons, Florida, everyone else that we're going to talk about the rest of this way. That should give them enough cushion. But what's going to be really fascinating is the potential for a team, and this is the other team that I have in this tier, Purdue, to catch them. Because I do think that a loss for UConn does at least drag them into a debate with the Purdue team. Not necessarily going to mean that they drop, but it's at least going to be a really interesting discussion to have because Purdue has more losses on their resume. Of course, another UConn loss would drag them a little bit closer in that category, but to debate these two teams, you're really looking at UConn and an understanding of what this team is, what they did early in the season, and the level they are performing at versus a Purdue team that has seen a couple of ups and downs, has taken a couple more losses, but has done all of this in a much tougher schedule through conference play. And also played a tough schedule in non-conference. So it's not like we're debating a team that took the easy route for half the season and then played a tough schedule versus flipping that thing around. So Purdue, based on the strength of the Big Ten, I think would at least enter the discussion where things get really tricky, and why I do think, again, that UConn is the heavy favorite to end up in this spot, is that UConn, if they took a loss at some point between now and Selection Sunday, would only probably fall if Purdue runs the table. Now, that would not only mean that Purdue has won out. That means that they've beaten likely a Michigan. They've probably beaten multiple other quad one opponents in the Big Ten. So it's a really tough path. And if they were able to achieve that path, they might have enough in the tank with how many wins they would stack up on their resume to make that an interesting argument regardless of if UConn had lost or not. So Purdue running all the way to the conference championship makes things really interesting, but it's not the only path that they have to the one seed. When we talk about this next group of teams, I think that they're probably the only teams, or the teams that can only make it to the one seed line by making a run and winning their conference title. Houston is in that group. Iowa State is in that group. Both of those in the Big 12. Both of those, of course, would have to make a run that would include probably beating each other, would include a shot likely at Arizona at some point during that bracket. would include, again, multiple other big time teams, whether it's Kansas, whether it's Texas Tech, BYU. You would be making a run through a large number of teams that are considered high level if you run all the way through that Big 12 tournament and win the conference title. So for both of these teams, I think that there is a pathway, but it involves winning out and UConn likely taking a loss. It's not impossible for them to reach it with UConn winning out, but I don't think that it's likely at all that we see a team that we know is above fall below these set of teams because of the distance that is currently between them. Iowa State being somewhere sixth or seventh on the seed line, Houston being probably seventh or eighth, depending on what you're looking at on the overall seed line right now. For them to make that jump, it's going to take an incredible run of just win after win after win, day after day in the conference tournament to get to that point, to get within reach even of UConn. Same situation with Florida, whose analytics continue to rapidly improve. And that's what's really interesting with them is how high those analytics can really rise. How high can they go in the resume metrics over these next couple of weeks? If they run the table and do so convincingly in the SEC, they are going to have computer numbers that will, at the very least, make it worth having a debate if UConn takes a loss. I think that's where it's going to get really interesting from that point. If UConn takes a loss, this thing opens to many more teams. Because as I said, I think there's really only one team that could potentially catch them if they win out. If they lose, now we're talking about these three teams being added if they can make a run through their conference championship game. So that would mean the entire 2 seed line that is in some amount of reach being able to touch this 1 seed line. The other interesting team, the only other one worth mentioning really at this point, is Illinois, an Illinois team that is still loved by the analytic models. Their offense is one of the best, at least according to the computers, that we've ever seen in college basketball. Unfortunately, though, with the defense not quite matching up with some of these other top teams, with some of the just overall losses that they've stacked up being more than some of these other teams that we're talking about. Again, their need to run the table, they would have to beat Michigan in the regular season. They would have to then make it all the way to the conference championship game and beat a Michigan or Purdue, probably maybe even both of those teams during their run. You're asking a lot of this team. They're the dark horse, though, if there is one, to make a run at this number 1 seed that is left available after those 3 that are pretty much locked in to at least somewhere on that 1 seed line. When we come back on the other side, we will be talking about the player of the year and coach of the year races, what it's coming down to in those battles right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in here on 3 True Values as we keep things rolling. We're talking about the player of the year and coach of the year candidates that can still make a run at those awards here in the final weeks of the regular season. And we're going to start with player of the year because I think that one is much more cut and dry. Just really not a whole lot to debate at this point. It appears that Cameron Boozer should run away with this award. I think the really interesting thing to follow is how close can he get to unanimous, both among voters and in terms of the number of awards, because we know that there are multiple outlets which will hand out a National Player of the Year award for this season. So let's take a look at what has made him so special in this awards race. Obviously, Duke is the number 1 overall seed. He is their best player. He is not only their best player, but he does things on both ends of the floor. He does things in multiple areas of the floor. He is the go-to scorer. He can score down low. He can rebound at a really high level. He facilitates from the top of the key. He can also switch a little bit on defense when they ask him to. So I think that he has really an outsized impact on Duke's success as the top team in college basketball as we stand. You then look at the metrics because we know that he's among the top leaders in points per game. We know that he's averaging 20 and 10 for the season. Well, what do the metrics look like? Well, they tell you that he has one of the best PERs in college basketball history, right up there with Zion Williamson and others. They will tell you that he has one of the best win share performances in college basketball history, as well as one of the best box plus minuses we've ever seen in the sport. His offensive rating is through the roof. His defensive rating is one of the lowest in college basketball. He is leading the conference in almost all of these things that I've mentioned. He's leading the country in many of them. And so his outsized impact on team success, how wildly successful his team has been, his notoriety as one of the star freshmen who has made this season so special, that has drawn in so much interest from casual fans, only adds to the inevitability that he will win National Player of the Year. And this conversation is coming up this week. The reason that I wanted to talk about particularly the Player of the Year debate, not much of one this season, is because of John Calipari's comments last night, questioning why Darius Acuff wasn't more involved in National Player of the Year conversations. And to that, I would respond, that would be a fair point in any other season, just about. But Cameron Boozer is so far ahead of every other player in each category that you could make an argument for. Because not only does he average almost 23 and 10, he averages 4 assists. So you can just point to any stat category and there is a response that Cam Boozer is not only on par, but potentially better within the college basketball game at doing those things. He is the best college basketball player of this freshman class, and I don't think it's particularly close. Now, there are others who could very well be better NBA prospects, who might have higher ceilings in a different style of basketball. But as it stands, what we have seen this season, his impact has been incredible. And so it's unfortunate for the Darius Acuffs, for the AJ DeBonsas, for the rest of that freshman class who has made an outsized impact for freshmen, that they're not really even in this debate. It's also unfortunate for guys like Justin Jefferson at Iowa State, who is having a monster season, really contributing to winning on both ends of the floor as a veteran guy. Somebody who is the textbook guy to be in the running for an award like this. Yaxel Lindeborg at Michigan, another guy leading a 1-seed team with a big impact on both ends of the floor. But what Cam Boozer is doing is so historic within college basketball that I don't think it will be particularly close in any of these votings that we have for National Player of the Year. It really feels like he is the guy. It'll be interesting to see who's number 2, though. I think that you can make a strong case for the last 2 guys that I mentioned. Yaxel Lindeborg, we know where Michigan is currently in the rankings. We look at Joshua Jefferson and how he's lifted this Iowa State team this season. I think that AJ DeBonsa is also in that conversation because of how dominant he has been, averaging over 25 points per game, almost 7 rebounds and 4 assists as well. He has done it all for a BYU team that is way further down in the rankings than you will ever see a National Player of the Year candidate come from. But he has really carried this team that at times was ranked that high before his co-star Richie Saunders went down with a season-ending injury. So I think that that creates a little bit of a caveat where he'll get a little bit of love, but I'm just not sure how close he can really come to even those 2 guys previously mentioned, much less the Cameron Boozer debate at the very top of the MVP discussions. When we talk about Coach of the Year, though, That one's a little bit more interesting. We've got a little bit more of a runway, a few more candidates to discuss. And I think that this is not going to be a comprehensive list, but this is the list that I've narrowed down. The guys that would have my vote if I was to be asked who my pick for coach of the year would be. Again, I think that there's plenty of ways you can go with this award, but I've narrowed it down to three candidates. The first one being Travis Steele and what he's doing at Miami, Ohio. I don't think that you can really have a discussion about the coach of the year without mentioning him, because an undefeated record is something that is almost unheard of in college basketball, particularly these days. And for him to be doing that at Miami, Ohio, I understand the strength of schedule. I understand the level of competition that he has gone against, the place that they still are in the rankings despite being undefeated. I get that they're still a bubble team, even as a 28-0 MAC contender. But for him to be able to put together a roster like that, that no one really saw coming, this is not one of those situations where entering the season, everyone looked at Miami, Ohio and said, okay, pencil them in. They will run away with the MAC. They will be in the NCAA tournament. No, Akron was actually the team most often projected to land their automatic bid. And there was really no discussion of any of those teams coming close to the bubble debate. So for him to have this team at the level that it is for this long, I think that if they go undefeated, I'm tempted to just give him the award for that. I think that a first year coach Ryan Odom at Virginia also deserves a long look here. One of the best records in college basketball. This Virginia team, I don't think gets quite enough love for how consistent they have been. This is a team that went out and built a roster in a very modern fashion. They got a couple of guys to come from overseas. They got a couple of guys through the transfer portal, retained, whether that was Ryan Odom retaining a couple of players from VCU that he really liked, or retaining Chance Mallory from the Virginia roster. He brings in some guys that he's familiar with, brings in a couple of transfers who will have an impact, brings in a couple of international guys, and he has really done well at structuring that rotation where every player understands their role, every player understands where they stand in the pecking order. That's something that's been very hard to do for a lot of coaches in college basketball recently. So for Ryan Odom to get that so right in year one, to have Virginia up into the conversations that it is, a potential 3 seed now as we look at bracketology, right ahead of a game against Duke, I think that he's got a big chance to lift his coach of the year stock this weekend. And the other candidate that I will throw out there is Fred Hoiberg, because another coach that kind of entered the season under the radar. They went on a long undefeated run, and it got picked apart a little bit by people saying, look at the non-conference strength of schedule, and that's understandable. But again, he's a coach who took a team and way overachieved with it. Regardless of what the schedule was, Nebraska was not projected to be undefeated for so long, to raise this high in the rankings, to be so high up in the analytic metrics, because that's the thing. The analytics won't lie to you. The analytics will take into account the level of competition that they have played to this point. Nebraska is firmly in the top 16 seeds right now. They are one of the best teams in college basketball. No matter how they got there, they have become that. And so for Fred Hoiberg to take a team that was probably not considered a real solid NCAA tournament contender, maybe a bubble team by some, to have that team as high up in these rankings as he does has been an incredible job, and I think deserves a lot of credit as well, because he didn't go out and land a bunch of big splashes either. It was a lot of internal growth. It was getting Rienk Mast back and identifying the right players for their system. So a big shout out to the work that he has done. If I had to vote today, if the season ended today, I should say it that way, because I think that, as I pointed out with Travis Steele's resume, it really depends on them being undefeated. For Ryan Odom, if they can get this win against Duke, I think that propels him way up the board. I think right now I would give it to Travis Steele for what he's done at Miami, Ohio. I think that this is something that is so rare, so uncommon, that it's worth rewarding by giving him an award and making it forever part of the college basketball history. When you look through the record books, you will see Coach of the Year undefeated Miami, Ohio. That's going to stand out for quite some time. I guarantee you that is going to be something that we remember when we look back through and think, wow, they really went undefeated through the regular season as that small program, a program that wasn't projected to be the dominant force in that conference even. That's worth honoring. And so I would lean towards giving him the award as we stand today. When we come back on the other side, we've got a couple of mailbag questions for you, and then we'll get you out of here with the games of the week as we always do on Three True Values. Welcome back in here as we wrap up today's episode of Three True Values. We're opening up the mailbag, and I'm going to answer some of the questions that I've gotten over the course of the last few weeks around college basketball. We're starting with a really interesting one here, asking, are developmental coaches, particularly with sophisticated schemes, starting to die off? This was a question that was posed to me relating to USC's struggles, what Eric Musselman has been through in these last couple of seasons in particular, but really this season as well. And I think it's an interesting debate to kind of pick apart here because there's two levels to it. You've got the developmental coaches, which Eric Musselman is part of. You look across the country, there are plenty of developmental coaches. There's plenty of developmental coaches who have also hung it up. Jay Wright and Tony Bennett, right there among them. So, is that style of coaching dead? I don't believe so. I think that it has changed drastically in the transfer era, though. And so here's how I'm going to break this down. There are other coaches across the country who I would definitely define as developmental coaches. I think you look at Nate Oates at Alabama, you look at Todd Golden at Florida. Recently retired Bruce Pearl at Auburn was able to do this in the transfer portal era. I think that it is possible to develop talent through the transfer portal, mix in freshmen, even bring in a couple of overseas guys and develop them over time. I think that you look at Ryan Odom and what he's been able to do at Virginia just in this first year. I think that's a sign that he's going to be a developmental coach. It's just a different model than what Tony Bennett did before him at Virginia. It's not about bringing in a group of freshmen that you have identified as young, untapped potential and raising them up in your scheme year over year until as a junior, they fully understand every read. They understand every motion in the offense. They understand every rotation in the defense. You just don't have time for that anymore. So some of the complex schemes, which is the other side of this, Eric Musselman runs a little bit more of a complex system than some offenses, some defenses. I think that's where you get into a little bit more trouble. Because if you look at Eric Musselman, he's a guy who was using the transfer portal, or at least the ability to transfer. The portal itself wasn't quite there, but he was taking in transfers long before it was a common thing in college basketball. In fact, he was one of the first coaches to go for a roster that was almost exclusively built through the transfer portal. And he had great success. He took a Nevada team deep into the NCAA tournament. He took an Arkansas team to the Elite Eight on multiple occasions, was a consistent presence deep in the postseason. So what then would change once it became a portal system, once NIL was introduced? What is it that changed about that system that he's no longer able to use? Well, the biggest difference is that when he started that method, now this isn't the only way he used it, but when he started that method, transfers had to sit out a season. And so a player was then able to spend a full year just practicing, reviewing tape, sitting through practices, understanding film, all of the things that you need to do to step into a system and have success. These players would come in and he would take high risk prospects. Now, high risk can mean a bunch of different things. That doesn't mean necessarily low character guys. It doesn't mean even that they were a risk off the court at all to bring to the roster. That's not what I mean. Now, You can bring in those guys and they are high risk. But what I mean by that is guys who had a very high ceiling, very low floor. You bring in a guy who's jumping 2 levels from low major straight to the high major level. That guy's going to struggle. We've seen it across college basketball. You bring in these transfers, they were great at the low major level as a freshman. You bring them all the way up to the high major level, they struggle. They might have to transfer back to the mid major level and then find success, grow from there. They might even transfer back up to the high major level later once they do get little bit more development. But when he was able to bring those guys low major to high major, he was able to sit them for a year, train them. They understood the system. They had a year to catch up, whether that was physically, whether that was mentally in the game. And they were then prepared to make an impact on the roster. He also understood, because he had seen them for a full season in the building, what they brought to then place them into that rotation where they were needed. The new transfer portal is so fast and it's all instant. They're immediately the star player of your team. And so when the star player of your team does not understand your systems, the star player of your team has not been around you. He doesn't understand how you run practice. He doesn't understand what rotations you want to run, the offense or the defense. You're learning these things on the fly. And now it's not just one player who's learning it on the fly. You're talking about 4 or 5 guys on the court at the same time, all learning not only the system, but each other as well. And I think that's where Eric Musselman has found the biggest struggles over these past few seasons, is trying to mix and match the ability to bring in transfers with the ability to keep a consistent system, to keep a consistent culture within that program. And that's a struggle that coaches are having all across the country. And so it is very difficult to have a complex system put in place in college basketball these days. That doesn't mean you can't do unique things. It doesn't mean you can't have a really good offense. We're seeing better offensive numbers, in fact, than ever before. I think where this really hurts teams more than anything is on the defensive end. It's hard to trust that there's a man behind you if you've never played with that center. You don't know how he rotates to the rim. So you might help too far off. All of a sudden, there's an open 3. Well, that's the one thing you can't allow. So there's all kinds of these things that go into creating a high-level offense, creating a high-level defense. You can get as much talent as you want on the floor. If they don't know how to play together, they're not going to be a cohesive defense, and they're going to struggle to create the most efficient offense possible. So that's where we stand with this interesting debate. I think you can develop, but I don't think that you can develop into very complex systems without having an established culture. And I don't have the exact answers on how you do that. But we've seen a couple of examples across the country that have created some sustained success, that we're seeing produce results each year. And so find your model, because that's the one thing that the transfer portal has for sure opened up. There's not one way to win in college basketball. You don't have to go get the one and dones. You don't have to go get the top dollar transfers. You can build a cohesive roster. You can go dip into the international market. You can bring in freshmen. At the end of the day, it's all about creating the most cohesive group that you can. That's how you win in college basketball today. Because you're going to see some big dollar teams that have no cohesion, and they're going to flail off. You're going to see some teams that didn't invest any money into this, relying on players that are too young. They're going to fall off. So you can make your way up the board by just finding players that fit together, that quickly understand the system, that are able to then grow together as you continue to implement things. That's really the key that we have found over these past couple of seasons. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these coaches do adjust to that, including Eric Musselman at USC. Next question, I mentioned him actually in my answer there, but does Tony Bennett to the Lakers matter? I think it kind of depends on what you define mattering as. He will be a consultant for the Lakers. Seems like he's going to help do some evaluation. I don't think it can hurt. I think that he is a coach who, like I said, he's been really good at finding the developmental guy throughout the years. He identified Trey Murphy as a guy that Virginia should go after. Guys like Reese Beekman, guys like Malcolm Brogdon. He's got a long history of being able to find that diamond in the rough. So I think that for sure, DeAndre Hunter right there among those as well. Ty Jerome, a guy who's now making a name for himself in the NBA. So I think it's definitely worthwhile to at least get his input. And there's no cap on how much you can spend on those kinds of things in the NBA, only on what you can pay players within the salary cap. So I think it's worth it to make that kind of investment into at least getting the best possible feedback on each player that you're evaluating. We'll see if it really pays off in any significant way, but yes, it's a really interesting move, and I think one that will at least be worth their time. Next question here is, what does Missouri have to do to be safe in the NCAA tournament field? Well, they've gotten out of the last four in. That's the first major step with their win during the midweek schedule. Now, the next key for them, if they can win out in the regular season, I think that they're definitely safe. If they can go 2-1 in the regular season, I think that you look at things and you say, one win in the SEC tournament makes us feel really good. Maybe, look, there's always the chance, but I think you feel really good if you get one win in the SEC tournament after going 2-1 to close the regular season, with that loss being to Arkansas. Anything else, whether it's a loss to one of those other two teams, whether it's losing in that first game of the SEC tournament, I think you start to sweat it a little, at least a little bit. But I think Missouri has put themselves in really good position as we come down the stretch here. Yes, the analytics are still catching up, but they've got the resume metrics to go head to head with any of the teams that are in this debate for a bubble spot. And finally, the last question that we had from today's show is, where will I be for the NCAA tournament? I will be in the Tampa regional watching those first weekend games. So I will have some live coverage from there, breaking down some things from those games and also from the press conferences afterwards. So stay tuned for plenty of that over these next couple of weeks as well. Before we get you out of here today, we got to get you the games of the week. As promised, tonight we've got Michigan State against Purdue, which is a rare, really good game on a Thursday night. On Friday, we're going with Michigan and against Illinois. And this is where I want to take a quick just sidestep here and just say thank you to the Big Ten, who has really identified one of the gaps in the market. The ability to place high level games on Thursday nights and particularly Friday nights throughout this season has, I think, put a spotlight on their conference. Those were nights that were really reserved for mid-major games. There wasn't a whole lot of action going on, not a lot of attention being paid to college basketball from Thursday until Saturday morning. And so to put a couple of your marquee games in those windows, I think has drawn a lot of attention to your conference, and I think has worked out really well, something that I'm sure they will continue. I'm sure other conferences are going to start to at least try to edge in on as they continue to identify the best way to promote their conferences. On Saturday, we will go with Duke against Virginia. I just am really fascinated by this game. Virginia has been so consistent. Duke has been so dominant. And I still think that Duke is probably the favorite in this matchup, but the Virginia team is really good. I think they're being very heavily underrated to this point. On Sunday, a little bit of a light schedule, not a whole lot going on. We've got a couple more Big Ten games for you, but we're going to go with Charleston against UNC Wilmington. That's a really important one in the CAA. So we're going to, in these final weeks, take another look at some of these mid-major teams that could be potential upset bids for the NCAA tournament. Arizona against Iowa State is our game on Monday, Big Monday, presenting another huge matchup in the Big 12 there. On Tuesday, we're going to go with Nebraska against UCLA, a real opportunity for UCLA to cement themselves on the right side of the bubble in the final week of the regular season. And then on Wednesday, we got the same thing in the SEC where Texas can really solidify their spot against Arkansas. Arkansas could keep just steadily climbing, getting closer and closer to a potential entry into that top 16 and get a 4 seed bid for the NCAA tournament. When we come back next week, we will have plenty more content for you. We will have either some recruiting talk or some NBA draft talk. We'll see which way we go early in the week. And then towards the end of the week, we will be talking more about the final week of the regular season. We'll also talk some about the mid-major conference tournaments that will be going on by that point in the calendar. Thanks for tuning in to Three True Values. The next time we will speak to you will be in March. So get ready for the madness. Be sure to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, whatever you do to get the word out about this podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.